Hello and welcome to the first tutorial for Sig Mobile. Today we're going to be going over the basic syntax for Flutter, as well as discussing the idea of stateful and stateless widgets within Flutter and how we make sure we're building the correct type of state for our apps. To start off with, I'm here on dartpad.dev. This is basically a playground that you can use to test your own test your own code, quite similar to a lot of other things such as like a Java playground or a Python playground. And so here we have like our void main function, which is quite common. And in here, let's just start off with going over some of the main types, which are like string. And usually whenever you create any variable in Flutter, you want to make sure you're defining the type of the variable. That is the way Dart works. It's a statically written language, which means you have to define the type of any variable you create. And so here we have a string, let's say name, and then we can set the value to name to be anything we want. So I don't know, max, for example. And then there's also bools. Bools are booleans. You can set it to like true or false. So let's just say like verified, I guess. Verified equals true, right? And so this is some very basic syntax. If you've seen Java, it should look very familiar to you. If you look at the function itself, you usually have the type of the function first, then the name of the function, the parentheses in which you can pass in any parameters you would normally need for a function, and then your curly braces inside of that comes your code. So then there's also ints, there's doubles, there's floats, and then there's also another type, which is, sorry, I ran the code while having like double in there, which that's why I was throwing an error. But there's also a type called dynamic, which normally you don't want to use dynamic, but the idea is similar to var, which I believe var also exists. But you don't want to use like dynamic or var too often. The only times I would say it makes sense is like I've used it for situations where I'm receiving data like through an API and it's like a JSON format, and so like defining the type, for example, map, right? It's a map of something, but what is it, right? Like here it says map dynamic to dynamic, and so what if it's like a map of lists and the list is another map inside of that, and blah blah blah. So it just gets like really annoying, and so you can just write dynamic right off the bat, and as long as you like, I guess, keep track of what type of variable you're dealing with, you should be fine. That's about it for basic syntax. So next we're probably, let me just run this goes away. The next thing I want to talk about is print statements. If you want to print anything, you can just print it here. It's like print name, for example. If you run that, then you'll be able to see it come up here when it's done running. Max, there we go. And so here it says like, oh, verified isn't used, so try to not like have local variables that aren't used. Yeah, that's fine. For this case, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so next we're going to go off into VS Code, and here we're going to start writing our own app. For our first lecture, we're going to start with we're going to start with a calculator app. So to begin with, if you're in VS Code and you're like in this like new, or like, yeah, I think it's just like getting started. Yeah. It's a getting started page, right? If you hit Control-Shift-P, you open this command palette, which is this thing right here. And if for whatever reason, like that caret is not there, or I got angle bracket is not there, put that in, and then you can type Flutter if it doesn't show up. Flutter, if you type Flutter, then you want to make sure you click on New Project, because that's where we're starting. And here you can type, you can choose like what kind of thing you can make. So sometimes people make packages for Flutter as well, which we can get to that at a later point. But there's also modules, plugins, etc. Here we want application because that's what we're actually creating. So if you enter on that, it should now ask you, where do you want to put your thing, right? So I'm in Sig Mobile, I'll just choose here, and let's just call this calculator tutorial. Right. And now you may notice if you ran like if you hit Control-Shift-P and it did not show up Flutter when you search for Flutter, that is probably because you don't have the extension installed. So on the left side, you should see like this 4-cube thing. And if you search for Flutter here, I'd recommend, you definitely want to get this extension here, but I'd also recommend getting the Flutter snippets, which makes it a lot easier when you're typing code, because you can get like a whole bunch of boilerplate code just written out for you instantly. anyways, back to the actual code. This is the base project that you get whenever you create a new Flutter file, or sorry, Flutter project or application. And if you want, you can go ahead and take a look at reading all this, these comments here. It's really helpful. It will help you understand, get a better understanding of how certain elements work in this, but we're going to go over ourselves as well. So to start off with, we have a main.dart file that's in our library folder, and Flutter will always look for this main.dart file, and within that file it's always going to look for the void main function. That is the first thing it's going to do whenever it's running any application. And so usually you want to call this run app function within that, which calls, as you can notice, a class. And so this class here is obviously, it's like you can see it's a class here, and it's basically something that we create. And this is where we start creating like the visuals of of our app rather. And so while I go over this, let me first open the emulator. So if you don't have an emulator open, you can note it, like you can check down here. For some of you, it might say Chrome. If it does, just like click on it, and you want to start like, ideally you want to use like a mobile emulator, but if you want to use Chrome, you can, because Flutter works with web apps as well. So here I'm just going to use this one. And so while that's launching up, here we have a class called myApp, and really myApp is just a widget, and we call it a widget because widgets are these things that we basically see in the application itself. For example, in the calculator app, it would be the buttons that you click are all widgets. The text that you see inside the button, like the numbers, would be a widget. And then what you see where you type, like, when you type your equation out, right, like 1 + 1, the 1 + 1 that is shown and the result for that are also widgets. So basically everything you see on the application is a widget. And a widget in terms of code is it's just a class in which you can pass in multiple parameters, and each one of those parameters will define how the widget looks and interacts with other widgets. For example, here we have the myApp class, which extends a stateless widget class, and the stateless widget class is abstract, which means that you cannot create like your own stateless, or basically the only way to use, like, you cannot create a stateless widget object is what I mean. You have to create a class that extends this class. And so here we're extending the stateless widget class, and I'll go into more detail about stateless and stateful widgets in a second. But for now, we have this class here, and because we're extending the stateless widget class, we have to override this build function. And it's the same for a stateful widget, we have to override the build function. And that's because the build function tells Flutter what we need to actually build. So if we look in here, we return a widget, and if you look at the build, like it expects the return type to be widget, right? And so notice build is a function, and again we're writing the type of the function first, then the name of the function, and then the actual passed parameter. And so in here we have material app is what's being returned as the widget, and material app itself is just a basic app design for Android. And so in that there are multiple different parameters you can pass in. As an example, we see here that it says title is Flutter demo, and the theme is the theme data, which is another widget, or rather this is just a class. And in this you can pass in multiple parameters as well. So for example, I can change the accent color, brightness, app bar theme, etc. And there's like so many different things that you can just add in and change to basically customize or personalize your app in the way you want it to look. And that's pretty much the basic of how widgets work. You call it in like a build function, and then you pass in the parameters that you want, and you're basically set. So material app, one of the main things that's required, I believe, is a home page and the title. And so in here, we have a home page, which is just like another widget, right? And you pass in my home page, which my home page is the actual stateful widget. And in here, this is where we create, let me run the app first. So if you want to run the app, you have F5 or function F5, and it should start running the app in debug mode, right? And so it should run it here. And for the very first time, it might seem like it's taking a while to load. That is normal because Gradle can sometimes take a lot of time to just build the app in general on a new emulator. So let's talk about stateful and stateless widgets. The idea behind stateful and stateless widgets is making sure we do not repaint the screen we're looking at whenever a change occurs. So basically, there are certain times where you would want to have something change in your screen that the user is seeing, but when that change occurs, you do not want to repaint the entire screen, and rather you would want to paint just the item that is actually changing. For example, in our case, whenever the user like types 1+1, it will show 1+1, right? And so like every time they like click plus after that, then we need to change the text from 1+1 to 1+1 and then add the plus at the end. And so that is something that's changing. And so in order for Flutter to figure out, okay, I need to only repaint like that text which says 1+1, I need to define the actual widget as a stateful widget. So in the example that's given to us here, we have a Flutter, we have a demo page, right? And here it says you have pushed the buttons this many times, and it says 0. If I click the plus, it's going to increase. So every time I hit this plus button, it's increasing this number here, and it's changing this text over here. It does not repaint this text here. It does not repaint anything here, not the button. It just repaints that text here because we're putting the text in a stateful widget, and we're calling something called setState. So let's just go through what this actually does, like this this class. So first off, you have to define like its constructor, right? So that's just like you pass in a key and you pass in like the title. And so the key, if you notice, it's key and then question mark. If you notice some of these things here, like theme data is the type, and then there's a question mark at the end as well. The question mark basically means it's a nullable type. So you can basically set that value to null and it will be fine. It will not cause any errors. So, but here you can see there's required, and then the required item is the title. And here we have like the actual title as part of the, you could call it state of this class. And then we call this create state function that's part of the stateful widget function or class. And that calls in the my home page state class. And here, all we really need to do is we have to override this build function, right? Which is like similar to the stateless widget. And so here, what do? We return a scaffold, and the scaffold is basically all of this you see here. So the scaffold has an app bar parameter, and that's why we're able to see an app bar. It also has the body parameter, which is everything underneath the app bar. Then we have text for the app bar, that's for the title. So instead of actually having text, we could even put like an icon widget there. And so then instead of saying this, it would say like show an icon. We have in the body, it's center. And so center is a widget that basically centers all of its children or its child and everything that's inside it. So that's why this is centered here. Then we have a column. Column basically allows you to pass in multiple different widgets into its constructor, and each of those widgets will be stacked vertically. There's a similar widget called row, which does the exact same thing, but it just does it horizontally. Notice we also have main axis alignment here. For columns, main axis alignment is, or rather just in general, like main axis alignment is like the alignment of the widget itself. And for a column, the main axis alignment is in the direction of the column, so it would be vertically. And then cross axis alignment is like the opposite direction of the widget you're using. So for column, the opposite would be horizontal. But then if you're using a row, the main axis alignment for row is horizontal and cross axis alignment is vertical. And so in here we have the children parameter, which is a required parameter for columns and rows. And in that, it will take a list of widgets. And here we literally just have a list, right? So we have like our first text, we have a second text, and we can just keep on listing texts or like other widgets if we want, because we see like the type here is widget, right? And you can just like separate them by commas and you're fine. So here we have that you have pushed this button this many times, and notice that it says const here. That's another thing about Flutter, is like whenever you have a widget that is not changing, you will put const in front of it. Like if I delete this, it will tell me to put const in front of it, because we know that it's a constant widget. And so it's better to put constant there so that Flutter does not take the time or the processing power to determine whether this widget actually changes or not. So if you notice, we have this counter variable right here that we've defined in the state of our class, and we pass it into this text widget, but we don't call the widget constant, and that's because this is a variable. And so if you're passing in a variable into any widget, you shouldn't call it constant, because a variable can change unless that variable is also constant. And then we also have the style here. So this idea here is you're taking the theme of the current, when you call a theme of context, it takes the theme of your current app, which basically takes the theme that we defined right here from the theme data in the material app. And so in there, we see that we have theme of context, text theme headline 4. And so the idea is you're just taking like what's the whatever theme that we use for headline 4 to be the style for this text here. So for example, what we can do, if you notice here in our theme data, we have a primary swatch is blue. If I change this primary swatch to green, then everything that uses the primary swatch will also turn green. And then again, you know, there's multiple different parameters you can pass in. So if, for example, I wanted to change the background color, colors blue, right? This is gonna make it look really bad, but did not change. Oh wait, scaffold background color. There we go. So now the scaffold background color is black. And if I change it to blue, then it's blue. This looks horrible. Let's just delete it and go back to that. But you get the idea. Basically, you can pass in any parameter. And if you wanted to, like, what I was doing here was basically I hit Control S, which whenever you press Control S, it does a hot reload. And a hot reload will immediately reflect the changes into your emulator here. And if for whatever reason the changes aren't actually being shown, you can click the quick restart, and that actually rebuilds the entire app from the start rather than just quickly implementing the changes that you create here. Ideally, you'd want to mainly just use the hot reload, which you can do by like hitting Control S to save, or whatever like you use for saving in your app, or sorry, in your editor. But if for whatever reason the changes you make aren't being shown, or there's something weird happening, then you would either quick restart, and if that doesn't work, then you can like just rebuild the entire app again. Anyways, so here we have the text app, text widget, which passes in this counter variable. And then we have the floating action button, which calls in a method, which is this onPressed function. So whenever you have any button, you have a required onPressed parameter, and that parameter you have to pass in some function. So the given like the default here, or rather the boilerplate code that you're given right when you start off with, is extracting this function outside, but you can always just like have the function right here, and that would also work, right? So then you can just like type whatever you want in here. If you want any parameters, you can put the parameters there. That's all fine as well. And so in this function, what they do is they call set state, and then they actually change what happened, like change the state in this class. So the idea is whenever I press this button, I want to change the counter variable to increase it. And so I could just do counter plus plus, but in order to tell Flutter that you need to rebuild whenever this variable changes, or rather whenever this change occurs, then you need to put it in the set state function. So as an example, if I were to remove this from the set state function, right? And if I just do that, when I do this, I am increasing the counter variable but it is not actually reflecting in the app because it's not telling Flutter, hey, you need to like repaint or rebuild this variable wherever it's being used, because that's how like Flutter knows, is it's through set state. Okay, so now we're gonna get started with actually creating the calculator app. So to start off with, I'm just gonna delete everything that's been given to us in the boilerplate code, and I'm gonna start creating my own class. So let's start with Stateful Widget, and let's call it calculator, right? And so if you notice, what I did here just now was I typed stfu, and that shows Flutter Stateful Widget. It's one of the these snippets that you get, and you can type in your class name here, and it will automatically add it to all these other places. So like I said, calculator, and then I already have like my stateful widget created. And you can do the exact same thing for stateless. You do stls, and that's your stateless widget. So for now, I'm gonna have like the root of my widget be stateless, and so I'll call it calculator. Stateless calculator. There. And then I'm gonna return a material app. There we go. In the material app, let's see. It's probably telling me, yeah, const, because nothing's changing. Okay, so in here, we're gonna have home, which is the actual home widget. So let's call this calc view. All right, and then we can create a calculator view class. So class, or rather, since it's a stateless, stateful, sorry. Stateful calc view. And then in here, let's just return a container. That's fine. I misspelled that. Calc. There you go. So we can call this const since nothing's actually changing. And then we can have a theme, and a theme mode, I think, is also a thing. Yep. Let's see what the type is. Theme mode dot dark. There. If I do that, then it will just use dark mode basically. Let's call this const as well. And since we put const outside, it assumes that everything inside is also constant. So if for whatever reason, like say this was not const, then we have to delete this const from out here, and then we have to define const everywhere else. Cool. So now in here, we can create a scaffold. And so this is usually like a very basic thing you do, is you have a material app, and then within that material app you have a scaffold, and then you can go from there. So let's create an app bar. App bar takes an app bar widget in which you can pass in multiple things. Actions, for example, is what you would see on the very right side of the app bar. For us, we just really want the title, and in this title we can put a calculator, or sorry, I think title takes a widget. Yeah, it does. So text, and then in here you can pass in calculator, and then we have let's do a style, and the style will be a text style which takes in a font size. Let's say the font size is 35. Cool. And here I'm just gonna put this as const. Cool. Now outside the app bar, or let's see, apart from the title, I think I can do a color as well, right? But actually, you know what, for now let's just save and see what it looks like. Oh, right, my app. So here I'd call the calculator app, or calculator class instead. There. And it's going to give us some build errors. Let's just restart the entire app, and there we go, we got calculator. This interesting. Let's go with theme. Theme data dot dark. Oh yeah. So theme data dot dark is like a variable, so we can't really use constant on it. So we delete the constant like I told you before, and then we put in constant for all the other places where it would remain constant. There we go. It seems like this does not want to work, so let's just not worry about that. And then I think, is it here? Yeah. So in the material app, there's a debug check mode banner. So if you notice here, we have like the debug banner. You can just set this to false. By default, it's set to true. If you set it to false, then this should be gone. And now in our scaffold, let's set the, is it here? Background color stop black. There we go. So now it's just gray here and then black underneath. Cool. And then after that, what we can do is set the body. The body, I'm gonna do, it's a column. And then in there, let's see, let's do children, and children is the widget. The type will be widget. And then here we can pass in a container. And then let's actually do this first. So in container, we'll have a child. The child will be a text. And in the text, we're gonna have, for now, let's just put 0 and then style, text style, and that can be font size 30. Oops, 30. And it's telling us to probably put this as const because nothing's changing. Oh, avoid unnecessary okay. Yeah, so we can ignore that for now. What it's telling us is like avoid putting unnecessary containers, and the reason for that is because like I'm basically not using this container to do anything right now, but I will in the future, so it's just there for now. So I have one container. I'm gonna make it 2. That way we have the first row will be like, or the first number will be what the user is actually typing in, and the second number will be the result that you get afterwards. So in this, for the font color, or I think it's just color, blue color, gray, and you can set the grayness to 900. So this is basically the idea. So if I just do gray, that will just take like a gray color, right? But then there are multiple different shades of gray. So if I set this to 900, I'd have to delete this const because that 900, you're like indexing into the 900th shade, which is technically not actually what do you say, constant. So actually let's do 800 because that's a little too bright. All right. You know what? Let's just not do 800. I think this is a little too dark. So we'll do that. And then in here for the container itself, notice how it's like aligned to the left. I think usually you want it aligned to the right. So we can take the alignment and we can call alignment dot center. Let's do center right. And that just aligns one of the containers. I forgot to do it for both. Do this and there. Now they're both aligned to the right. And then we can also add some padding. The idea for padding is to just give some extra space around that. So padding, edge insets, and we can use all. So there are multiple different ones you can use. So all will like apply the same value to all of them. LTRB will apply, you'll have to define the left, top, right, bottom, and it will apply those values to each of those. If you do only, then you pass in which type you're sending in, and it will only apply it to that specific type. So for now, let's just do all because that's simple, and we can add like 10. And since this is like a constant type, let's just put constant there, and we can copy this over into the other one as well. So there, now we have some spacing as well. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is after the container, we'll have a divider, which is like a very thin line that divides, that just shows like a division between two widgets, but we're gonna wrap that in an expanded. So the idea of expanded widgets are they just give like the widget inside it as much space vertically and horizontally as it can occupy. And that's so that when we look at the app itself, we're going to have like all the buttons pushed down rather than everything being like really close together up here. So expanded child, and in the child, we're going to pass in a divided. After that, we're going to use a table, and the idea for a table is to pass in these buttons. And so a table will literally look like a table, right? So you'll have like cells, and in each of those cells, we'll be having a button instead of an actual cell. So table, it takes in children. The type of the children is table row. And then, yep, it's a list of table rows. And then in here, we're going to pass in a button. So here, let's do text button. Text button. So as again, we have a required onPress function, and then we also have the actual child. So the child, we can have a text. And for the very first one, let's just do this. And then the onPressed function can just be that. And then, oh wait, my bad. Okay, so since it's a list of table rows, you can only have table row, right? So you do table row, and table row takes children, and this is where you can pass your thing in. So this, there we go. And for now, we can put that const. This is this, and this is a list of widget. There we go. Cool. So if I were to save this now, we're not really gonna, oh yeah, we see it right there at the very bottom. We have a button, it's blue, so let's change the colors of this. Style, say it is text style, and for the color, we can set colors dot, for C, let's do red. And so if you notice, like there's like all this not exactly refactoring, but like it's changing the format automatically, and it does that whenever you hit Control S. And if you notice, like right here, everything was in a line, and so in order, like if I delete this and then do that, then this is like just an entire line. But if I add commas after each of these widgets, then it will know like, okay, I have to like expand out this widget into a new line and create like this effect here because of these commas. And so you don't have to do that. I prefer to do it because it makes it easier for me to see what is being passed inside of a class or inside of a widget. But that's up to you to decide. Like for something like this, like it's only one thing, you don't really need to worry about it. Although let's also increase the size. Font size, let's make it 30 as well. Okay, so next what we're gonna do is probably give some style to this text button. Well, what we can do is inside this, we can call in style, and this takes a button style widget style. And in here, let's do padding, edge insets again. Dot on, let's just add 5. Let's see, what is this? Right, const. Now what is this? Okay, so usually when you're dealing with anything inside a button style, you need to call material state property, and you call this dot all function, and in that you can pass in this. Let's see. Invalid const function. So yeah, since this is not constant, you can't pass in constant. Can't pass in const there, but edge inset itself is constant. Why do I keep putting space there? There we go. So you can do that. And then let's see, for padding, what else can we do? You wanna have a shape, and this will take us. I think it's rounded rectangular. Rounded rectangle border, which, whoops, again, gotta pass this in through material state property. So material state property dot all, There we go. Okay. In here, we're gonna set the border radius to border radius dot circular. Oops. We're gonna set the value to 10. And then we can also have the side. I'm gonna use border side dot none. Cool. If we look at this now, we still haven't added the color yet, so let's do that. Background color, colors, gray. And here we're gonna pass in 900, or let's do 800. And this is gonna give us an error because it's not in material state again. Material state. This is probably the annoying part about button style. I don't know why they have us use material state property, but we just have to. So there we go. So you can notice it's like rounded edges here. If I make this like 30 to over exaggerate, then it's more of a button like that. But I prefer 10, so let's just leave it like that for now. Cool. So the next thing I would do is probably like, you know, we're gonna have 4 buttons in each row, and so the number of things that we have inside of a table row will determine the number of columns we have. So 4 buttons means 4 columns, but that, if you notice, would be like 4 text buttons for each row, and if there's like maybe 4 rows or 5 rows, that's like around 20 some buttons, and that's going to be like a lot of boilerplate or like repetitive code, and that's usually not ideal, especially because it's so big and long like this. So instead what we can do is we can extract this. So if you extract method, and we can call this build button. Cannot type. VS Code will extract it for me. There we go. And so let's change the passed in parameters. For example, we can add a title. String, just call it name, right? And that will be what we pass in here. And since we're passing in a variable, this cannot be constant, but this can. However, we can have color, that's going to be font color, and then we can have font size, so that will be double, and then we'll have another color that's just the color of the thing. And notice I'm gonna add these curly brackets here, and the idea for that I will go over in just a sec. But first, so it's basically like whenever you if you notice, for example, in any of these widgets, right, I have these like decoration colon key colon, and then you pass in the value. In order to get that, you need to use like these brackets here, and the idea is that each of these variables are not actually required variables, and so you can pick whichever ones you want to pass in, and the rest will use the default values. And so that's why we have some errors here, is because we have to pass in default values. So for the name, we can just have an empty string. For the color, we can just do colors. Colors dot so green. And then for the font size, we can use 30. And for the color of the button, we can use colors dot gray and set to 800. And so this color, I think, would have to be nullable, so we're gonna have to set it to nullable here. Or actually, no, I think it's because, yeah, default value has to be constant. This is not a constant value, so we can't really use that. Do I set it to 800 here? Yeah, I do. So let's just have it nullable, and then we'll pass in this value afterwards. So we can just do that. And so this will just say that color is null as its default value. So in here, the color of the text will be font color. The font size will be font size. And so we don't need to put that as constant. Background color will be color. And I think that's all we need to do. Take a look at this. We have our calculator here, and the button is not showing. Let's just, oh yeah, because I'm not passing the actual value. So C or rather, name is going to be C. The color is going to be colors dot gray 800. The font size, the font color is colors dot colors dot red, and then the last one was font size. I think font size will be 30. And there we go. There's our button. And so now we can just take this, let's put that there like that. Copy this. There we have 4 buttons now. And then we can just do this as that, like that. And we have 4 buttons. Cool. Now, if you notice here, there's like no padding in between these. So what I'm going to do is for the text button itself, I'm going to wrap with a container. And in this container, I'm going to pass in padding. And I have to change this to container as the type. And now we should be all good. There we go. So this padding, I mean, is basically just like left, top, right, bottom. So the top and bottom, I'm giving more space, and then left and right, not as much space. Cool. The onPressed function, we'll deal with that at a later point. For today's lecture, we're just going to be focusing on the visual aspect, and then once we're done with that, then we can start working on the logic. So I'm gonna change all of these values so you can copy it. I'm probably gonna like skip this part because it's all just like a bunch of copy pasting and a bunch of boilerplate code, really, if you want to call it that. Okay, so I'm all done with copy pasting all of that stuff. Really, it's just like if you look at this, I changed a little thing. I changed like name to be text instead. I don't know, just seemed more fitting. And then what I did was I had C as like white, but then I changed the button to red. And then I have this this icon here. This is just Unicode for what this would look like. Then there's the caret, and I have Unicode for division, multiplication, subtraction, and addition. Or I think subtraction and addition, I just used like the actual signs. Then there's the plus or minus here, the period, and then the equal sign, which is also green, and then the actual text is white. Cool. And so that's about it. We don't really have much else to go over. You can click on these. Nothing's really going to happen for now. But in our next lecture, we will go over the actual logic, which means like manipulating these values right here, changing things whenever you delete, whenever you go to a power, multiply, and all that stuff. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.